Hi, boys and girls. It's Mrs. Foster. We are starting a new unit in math, which is time, and time can be very tricky. So I thought I would put a little lesson together so that we could start off all on the same foot. Now, when we start telling time, we have to look at two hands. We're going to look at something called the hour hand, which is the shorter hand, and the minute hand, which is this longer hand. The hour hand is going to use the really big numbers that are around the clock. So starting with 12, and then we go this way, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12. And there's an AM and a PM, and we'll talk about those a little bit later in our lessons. So you just want to be familiar what a clock looks like. You need to know that there's an hour hand and a minute hand. We are just going to be learning to tell time to the nearest hour and the nearest half hour. Now, most importantly, we're going to look at the parts of a clock. So this clock shows a little bit better. The red hand is going to go with these big red numbers. And then the minute hand is going to be the blue hand, and it's going to point to each one of these little dots. And each one of these little dots represents a minute. So when it moves, it's moving one more minute each time. When we think about that, there's sometimes a third hand that goes all the way around the clock, and it's constantly moving. And that's called the second hand, because there are 60 seconds in 1 minute, and there are 60 minutes in 1 hour. So in order for this blue hand to go all the way around the clock, it would take 1 hour or 60 minutes. Now we're going to learn about two different types of clocks. The one on the left, this one right here, is the one that we see at school, and that is called an analog clock. And the one on the right is a digital clock. And you can see this digital clock is also at 12 p.m. because remember, there's a 12 p.m. and there's a 12 a.m. Now, this is what your math book pages would look like. So you can see the red numbers on the left are going to be what hour it is, and the hour comes first. And then what comes next is we'll look at the minutes, and you can see this would be minute 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So that number 1 represents two numbers. It could represent the hour 1 if the minute hand was pointing to it, or if the hour hand was pointing to it, or if you have the minute hand pointing to it, it would be only that 5 minutes have gone by. So this is where you need to learn to make sure that you can count by fives. So when we count the minutes, we count by 5. So we're not going to use the red numbers. We're going to use the blue numbers for the minute hand. So we would say 5, 10, 15, 20, 25, 30, 35, 40, 45, 50, 55, 60. But the thing about 60, we'll never write the number 60 on a clock. We would actually, that's when a new minute or a new hour starts over, and that would be 00. So let's look at your math page on the right. There are two kinds of clocks. This is the analog clock, and that's the one that we usually see at school. The hour hand is shorter, and it points to the hour. So I always like to think about the word hour is only 4 letters, 1, 2, 3, 4, and it goes with the shorter hand. The word minutes is longer. It has 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 letters. So the minute hand is longer because it has more letters. So if we look at this clock, remember, we always want to look at the shorter hand first. So it points to the number, what number, boys and girls? 3. If you said 3, you're correct, because we're going to use the inside numbers. And anytime that minute hand is pointing straight up at the 12, it would be actually going through the 12 and touching the end of the clock. We would call that o'clock. We're not going to call it 3:12. We're going to call it 3 o'clock. So let's try looking at number 1. Number 1, what number is the red hand pointing to? See if you can tell me that number. If you said 9, you're correct. 9, and then we don't say 12. Remember when we have the blue hand or the minute hand pointing up? We call it o'clock. So in order to read this, we would say it's 9 o'clock.